the sadness once in a while, so you know when the good times come. We're waiting on the good times now.
Hello, and welcome to my humble abode, where today we will be taking a look at Adobe Lightroom as I attempt to create and transform a regular car photography picture into a piece of art. So for today's lesson, what you will need is a mouse, a keyboard, a computer installed with Adobe Lightroom, and your creativity. So, if you're ready, I'm ready. Join me and follow me to my canvas. So, now that we're at my canvas, I would like to show you exactly what we're working with. This will be the base image that we use to create a brand new image, capturing the essence of this photo, but using our brand new canvas and creating something different. So, if we go over to Lightroom, I already have my photo selected, and it will be this one. While this picture isn't the exact same file-wise, it is the exact same ISO, focal length, and aperture, and shutter speed. And if you want to follow along, the canvas we will be using today is a 6240 by 4160. So what we want to do to begin is we want to grab our brush. Now, this is the most tedious, but the most excruciatingly important process. And this is the whole process throughout the whole entire video that we're going to be focusing on. That is painting in our canvas and painting in our vehicle in this car picture. So what I like to do before I even start is press O on my keyboard, and I make sure it says show mask overlay. This way, when I paint over my canvas, I get this nice overlay showing me exactly where any edits and any changes I do to this photo using exposure, contrast, etc. I can already tell where it's going to be without it being like this, where I don't know where it's going to be. So, let's grab our brushes and let's get started. So again, press 0 until it says mask overlay. And what I like to do is just zoom in on the photo. There's two ways we could approach this. We could go over the whole entire car in one big sweep, get every single spot like this, and then go back in the photo and then just erase the spots that we don't need like that. But that is not what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing a little bit more of an in-depth, detailed version of this. So what we're going to do is press Ctrl Z again until we get right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully press space and then left click and zoom in on my photo. What I'm going to do is just very delicately paint over the car. So right now I'm going over the right fender.
There we are.
I'm just going to go over all the parts of the car. Only the parts with paint. Or excuse me, I guess we could just say the body of the car. Any spots, let's say this bumper right here, we don't want to go over that because we're going to be doing some color correction later on. And if we color correct this, it'll change the color of this as well. So we don't want to do that. Now, what we want to do is just go over every little detail that we can. And don't worry if a little bit of feathering or a little bit of the mask goes over spots we don't want. We can easily get rid of that. So I just like to brush in a little bit. Just keep brushing. Just keep brushing.
There we are.
This is my favorite part of the experience. Just the sounds of me clicking my mouse. It's almost as if I'm painting the car myself. Beautiful. Now what we can do is, for example, let's say we have this spot right here where we can see a little bit of almost a glow on the car. So what we can do is press Alt, and that will bring us the eraser, and just delicately but carefully get rid of that until there is no more. Beautiful. Oh, I did not mean to do that. And we're just gonna go down here, so delicately, so perfect. Just get every little detail that we can. Make sure there's none on the tire. We will do the tire. We will paint the tire in later, so don't you fret. Just get that spot right there. Now there are also two ways of doing this. You can either erase spots piece by piece, so you're not missing them. So let's say we do this side of the car. We could erase, 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 erase. Or we could paint the whole entire car and then go from erase, erase, erase all in one bunch. But what I found out while doing that method is you tend to forget every little spot. So it's usually a little bit better to go in, paint a section of the car, and then erase parts of the car that you don't need in that section. So you're doing it piece by piece. That's what I recommend. But this is your canvas. You can do what you like. So let's go up here, get near the hood of the car, get near the light of the car. This part here tends to be a little bit tricky. It's always in the front of the car where you have, for most cars, the most sophisticated of areas. So I guess if that doesn't make sense, what I mean is you have small spots like this, you have small spots like this, you have small spots down here. So what I like to do on my canvas is just get a smaller brush and just get in those small, narrow spots. And it's not that big of a deal if you get a little bit of brush, a little bit of paint on pieces of the car that you don't want. It's not going to hurt it in the end as long as there's not too much. It's usually not noticeable, if noticeable at all. If you have just like a tiny, you can't even really zoom in, but like maybe right here. I'm going to erase it because I noticed it, but maybe right there you missed it. That won't be that big of a deal. It tends to be when you're up here, getting spots like up here, where there's a little bit of glow over the car, kind of like that. Like that, it'll be kind of like that. If you leave that, you will definitely see a noticeable glow over the car, especially once you increase the exposure once we're done painting this car. So I'm just going to keep on brushing. And what a little trick I've noticed is, let's say we're painting right here. Let's say we don't remember if that part of the car is even actually painted. What we can do is, let's say, oh, is this part of the car painted or not? So when we go into color correct it, it's not going to turn red right there. What we can easily do is press show original, and look, that part of the car is not painted. So we can just erase that, and voila. So I'm just going to keep on painting, get every little spot I can. Stuff like lettering on the car, you don't have to be too extreme with. You can just get a little bit, just enough to cover out the lettering. That it's not difficult in the sense of skill. It pushes your patience, I guess you could say. Getting every little inch, every little spot of the car, making sure it doesn't do that. It gets very tiring, and if you have multiple pictures that you need to edit, and you're doing this method for each and individual car, it gets very, very tiresome, and it takes up a lot of time. So what I recommend doing is doing one canvas at a time, no more than one. Maybe once your patience is a little bit thicker, then you can do two at a time. But beginning, I do not recommend doing more than one, because you will get lazy and you will get tired and you will miss spots and you tend to just not pay attention to smaller details once you're impatient and getting a little antsy by having to get every little spot. So I'm just painting the car, delicate strokes. That's alright. Perfect. And I do apologize for my squeaky chair. I hope that is not taken away from the experience at all. So right here, for example, I can't tell if this spot up here was paint or not, or if that's just a highlight. And it's just a highlight, or a reflection off of the roof, it appears. So I'm just going to keep painting that in. It's very simple once you get the hang of it. Even after doing this method for a very long time, or for a good while, I have noticed on certain cars or certain reflections, or excuse me, not reflections, but certain lightings or certain angles of the car, this can get very, very tricky. And I'm not gonna lie, this is a pretty simple canvas to work on. It's not too daunting because you have all of this body right here, and it's a nice full photo that you can easily get in the spots, the smaller spots, relatively easy. So I'm just gonna paint right there. Gonna get near the rear of the wheel, or the front almost. We're just gonna keep on painting. That's right. Perfect. Now, what we can do is just kind of go over any spots that look darker than the masking color. So let's say, right here. I'm not too sure if you can see that, but it's a little bit darker. Just go over that until you can't see it. Because what you'll do is, if you bring up the exposure, maybe even decrease the exposure of a vehicle when you're ready to edit your canvas, you will notice that there might be some spots or patches that are not colored in the whole entire way. So, seeing little spots like this, you just go right over them, and you don't have to worry about them later. Now, in all honesty, we can't zoom in very much more. We could leave this right here, but if you're trying to get the best results, try and erase any glowing that you can, any masking that is not supposed to be there. Like right here, maybe, for example, that wasn't supposed to be there. It's the small details, but they do go a very long way. And if you get it now, it saves you time when you see an edit or see a mistake, and you're just about to export the photo, and you realize, oh, I missed a spot. You can just get it all at once.
Painting should make you happy. It does nothing else. It should make you happy. And if it doesn't make you happy, you're doing the wrong thing. It should make you happy. Make you happy. You're doing the wrong thing. You're doing the wrong thing.
Beautiful. I think if we go in here, once Lightroom decides to load in my photo or my canvas, I think this is very well rounded. For what we did, or what I did, I think this canvas has been masked relatively well. While it looks ridiculous right now, let's press O again, to where it says show tool overlay. Now we have multiple ways we could approach this. We can turn up the exposure, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And get a little bit more of that color. Bring up the contrast to make it more of a cherry red Corvair. Bring up those shadows. Just a teeny little bit. And this is the big point, or big spot, that I think will blow your mind. You want a yellow Corvair? Or excuse me, a green Corvair? Well, that's not gonna happen because you gotta change, I don't know, maybe the temperature, maybe the tint. There's a lot of things you can do here to mess around with it. And it's obvious I did miss a few spots. That's okay, because we aren't gonna keep it this ugly green color anyway. But if you mess around with it long enough, you can make a red Corvair look green. But we're not going to be doing that, because we're not trying to disrespect the car. We're going to make it the the bright cherry red that it was meant to be. Just gonna go over these little spots that are darker than the rest, because that proves that we missed a few spots. Now I don't have to go into detail with this, but just get the spots that are obvious and just easy to point out, I guess. Perfect. So what we can do now is I like to bring up the texture a tiny bit to bring the car, give the car a little more detail. Now we're going to bring that clarity up a tiny bit. Now you can do this two ways. You can bring up the saturation or you can bring down the saturation. Not that much though, maybe like 20. Or we could bring it up by 20, so it really depends on how you want the car to look, depending on the environment. So if the environment's darker, I suggest you bring up the saturation. So in this case, the background, the location of the shoot is a little bit brighter. So I think bringing it up a little will bring out those colors in this more lighter scenario, I guess you could say. So what we could do, oh, not that, is I think it could use a little more contrast. A little bit less. 35 looks good. Just making sure I get every little spot that I can. And now, this is a preference. You can bring up down the highlights, or you can bring up the highlights. I typically recommend bringing down the highlights because it tends to get a little bit of the reflections. It tends to decrease the reflections just a tiny little bit. Not a lot, but just a tiny little bit. Now you don't want to do it too much or you'll underexpose the car and it won't have that same effect if, for example, you had the exposure up, if that makes sense. Because you're trying to make the car pop out of the photo. You're not trying to make it look like that, where it's not quite as extravagant. So I think around 15 should do it. Now what we can do is, since we're practically done with the car, there are two different things you could do, but I'm going to skip those for this particular photo. What you could do is get a new brush. Dip your brush and then get a new one. And what you can do is bring up that contrast, bring down the exposure, and you can go over the windows and kind of just go over them and practically tint them. But I'm not going to do that for this shot because the windows in real life were not tinted very much. So I'm just going to leave them quite like they are, and they look fine as they currently are. Now, quick little final touches so this video isn't too awful long, is what I typically like to do on almost every single shot that I have, as long as I have a little bit of foreground in the front here, is I like to bring down the exposure. Bring that exposure down a little bit more, bring the lines up towards the car, have the little middle part of the gradient right here. And what I tend to do is bring down the texture and clarity, and it kind of adds a little more depth to the photo. You can do this to the top, but I think in this photo it looks fine the way it is. So what can I be doing with the rest of the photo? I could add a preset. And yes, I do have Taylor Jackson's presets, but I do have a couple of my own. I have this preset, which is a little too dark for this photo, but if we just bring up that brightness or that exposure, it looks kind of bad. How about this creepy edit, which was not meant for car photography? It's not gonna work. We could try my newer car preset. Now that looks pretty good. If we bring that exposure up, that could look really moody. But what about new car vibe? Maybe bring down those blues, a little bit of the oranges. I think this preset will do it. Bring that exposure up. Now we're cooking. Now if you remember the photo from what I brought up earlier, they practically look almost the same. While in this photo it's a little bit brighter on the car, I think it still works very well, as there's a nice shadow right above the car, a little bit of a moodiness in the car, a little bit of a mysterious sort of vibe. So with that being said, let's get rid of the presets page, get rid of that page. And I think that can conclude this video. So while this image isn't perfect, I hope it gives you the idea of how to create a beautifully well sculpted, well crafted piece of art with your canvas. I hope you liked today's episode. I hope it helped you out a lot. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe. It'll help out a lot. So in the meantime, be looking out for more car photos or car videos, car photography videos. Look out for more photography videos in general. So in the meantime, keep taking pictures of cars. Keep doing whatever it is that you do with your camera. And I hope you create wonderful pieces of art on your canvas. So in the meantime, I'm Tyler, and I will see you in the next video.
I don't want to say real unpleasant, but they bother me if they don't have a lot of depth in them. Because our world, the way I see it, has a lot of depth. And that's the way I like to see paintings.